Have you ever been told you didn't belong when deep down you knew you had every right to be there? Imagine this. You're a young black billionaire girl, boarding a flight, ticket in hand, seat paid in full. But when you arrive, a white passenger is already in your place. The crew doesn't ask questions. They don't check the facts. They look at you and decide you don't belong. What do? Do you move quietly, swallow the humiliation, and hope the flight ends soon, or do you sit firmly, knowing that if you give up this seat today, you'll be asked to give up every seat for the rest of your life? Now, picture it's you in that moment, your heart racing, a cabin full of eyes watching. Would you stay? Would you fight for your place? This is the story of Naomi Carter, a teenage billionaire whose courage turned one moment of injustice into a movement that shook the entire airline industry. Stay with us because what happens next will leave you questioning how far you'd go to claim your right to belong. If this story speaks to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so we can continue bringing you powerful stories that matter. Naomi Carter had flown more times than she could count. Private jets, commercial flights, even once aboard a test aircraft her father had invested in. Yet today felt different. She was traveling alone. No entourage, no press. Just her backpack, and a boarding pass that read in bold letters, Seat 1A. It was an early afternoon at JFK. The usual hum of rolling suitcases and muffled announcements filled the terminal. Naomi tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, clutching the boarding pass like a quiet badge of independence. 17 years old, a tech prodigy with a mind already recognized at global conferences, but still, in the eyes of strangers, she was just another young black girl in a hoodie and sneakers. The gate agent scanned her ticket with a polite smile. "Enjoy your flight, Miss Carter." Naomi returned the smile, slipped her earbuds in, and boarded the aircraft. The smell of fresh leather and the muted lighting of the first-class cabin gave her a brief sense of calm. She walked confidently toward the very first row, the left-hand side, where her seat was waiting 1A. Except it wasn't. A woman was already there, mid-40s, blonde hair carefully curled, pearls at her neck, and a tailored blazer that seemed to announce its price before she spoke. Her designer handbag rested comfortably on Naomi's seat. She glanced up as Naomi stopped in the aisle. Naomi tried to keep her tone even. "Excuse me, this is my seat, 1A." She lifted the boarding pass slightly, so the numbers were visible. The woman smiled thinly, the kind of smile that doesn't soften the eyes. "Sweetheart, you must be confused. This is first class. Maybe check your ticket again." Naomi held her ground. "It says 1A, right here." Before the conversation could continue, a flight attendant appeared, Melissa Grant, slim, efficient, with a practiced professional tone. She looked at the boarding pass, then at Naomi, then at the woman in the seat. "Ma'am, is there an issue here?" Melissa asked. The woman waved her manicured hand. "This young girl seems to think she belongs here. But clearly, she's mistaken. Could you help her find her actual seat?" Naomi felt heat rise in her chest, but she forced herself to breathe slowly. "I am in the right seat. This is my ticket." Melissa bent slightly toward the passenger in 1A, lowering her voice just enough to sound conspiratorial. "Don't worry, ma'am. We'll sort this out." Then she straightened, her eyes fixing on Naomi. "Why don't you step back for a moment while I double-check the words were polite, but the tone was clear step aside." Naomi didn't move. She slipped her boarding pass back into her hoodie pocket and placed her backpack down by her feet. "I'm not moving. This is my seat." For a second, silence settled over the cabin. The few other passengers already seated in first class pretended to read magazines, scrolled through their phones, or looked out the window, but their ears were tuned to every word. Melissa's voice sharpened. "Miss, if you don't comply, I'll have to call my supervisor. We need to maintain order." Naomi felt the familiar knot in her stomach, the one she had felt at conferences when people assumed she was someone's assistant, rather than the keynote speaker. The one she had felt at award ceremonies where reporters asked if she was the scholarship recipient, rather than the inventor being honored. She swallowed hard, remembering her mother's words. "You don't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes the power is in simply staying put." So she sat down, right on the armrest of 1A, forcing the woman to shift uncomfortably. Naomi unzipped her laptop, powered it on, and placed it across her lap like a shield. The glowing screen lit her calm, determined face. "Miss, you cannot just," Melissa began. Naomi cut her off quietly. "I bought this seat. I have every right to be here. I'm not leaving." The tension thickened. The woman in 1A, Victoria Hale, though Naomi didn't know her name, yet snorted in disbelief. Unbelievable. From the row behind, someone coughed, then muttered just loud enough she showed the pass. "Let her sit." Melissa ignored it. She crossed her arms, radio in hand, ready to call for backup. Naomi's heart pounded, but her posture never faltered. She knew every second she held her ground. The cabin was watching, and that mattered. The hum of boarding continued in the background, luggage wheels clattering, families herding children, business travelers juggling phones, but in the cocoon of first class, everything had narrowed to this moment: a teenage black girl refusing to surrender her place, a white passenger gripping her stolen seat, and a flight attendant choosing sides before checking facts. Naomi adjusted her earbuds, not to listen to music, but to block out the edge of fear. She thought, if I move now, I'll be invisible forever. If I stay, maybe someone will finally see. And so she stayed. The seat in 1A had become more than leather and legroom. It had become a battlefield for dignity, and Naomi Carter was not about to lose. Naomi sat on the narrow edge of the armrest, her laptop balanced like a fragile barrier between herself and the storm forming around her. Her boarding pass burned in her pocket, not because of the ink on paper, but because of what it represented: proof, evidence, truth. Yet here she was, a young black girl in a hoodie, being treated as though the truth didn't matter. The hum of boarding faded into the background, replaced by the steady rhythm of her own breathing. She had taught herself to control it years ago, during robotics competitions where older students dismissed her, or at science fairs where judges praised her project but directed their questions to the boys standing nearby. In her head, she heard her mother's voice again. "You don't always need to shout, Naomi. Sometimes silence is louder than anger. Sometimes presence itself is a protest." She closed her eyes briefly. Memories pressed forward. At 13, she'd walked into a conference in San Francisco, clutching a presentation about her AI prototype for children with autism. She remembered the way a volunteer at the registration table had looked her up and down and said, "Sweetie, are you here to watch your dad present?" The humiliation had been sharp, almost physical. But then she had presented her work, and the room had fallen silent for a different reason. At 15, she had won a Global Tech Prize in Geneva. A reporter had asked, smiling brightly, "So, Which foundation paid for your trip as if the idea that she had earned her place there was unthinkable? Each moment had left a bruise, and yet each time she had chosen to stay steady, to keep moving forward. She had built armor out of calm, out of patience, out of the quiet insistence that she belonged. Now, sitting in 1A's disputed space, she felt the weight of all those memories pressing on her shoulders. They whispered, "You've been here before, and you survived. You'll survive this too." Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the screen of her laptop. She opened a document she had been working on, notes for a coding workshop she planned to teach at a youth center in Harlem. Lines of code stared back at her, logical, ordered, fair. Computers didn't care about skin color or age. If you wrote clean code, it worked. That's what she loved. Machines didn't judge. People did. The contrast stung. Melissa, the flight attendant, hovered nearby, arms folded, eyes flicking from Naomi to Victoria Hale, who still reclined in the seat as though nothing unusual was happening. Victoria's pearls glimmered in the soft cabin light. She scrolled on her phone, ignoring Naomi's presence as though she were an inconvenient shadow. Naomi's chest tightened. Why is it always like this? Why do they look past me until I prove them wrong? Her heart raced, not just with anger, but with fear. What if they really dragged her off? What if they forced her into economy, humiliated her in front of everyone? The thought of walking down that aisle, the eyes of passengers on her, some sympathetic, some sneering, it made her stomach turn. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "No, not this time." The whisper anchored her. A man clearing his throat broke her thoughts. In the row behind, the elderly veteran, Henry Brooks, leaned forward. His voice was gravelly but firm. "Young lady, don't let them push you around. You showed your pass. You have every right." Naomi turned slightly, meeting his gaze. There was no pity in his eyes, only recognition. He had probably seen his own share of injustice. The quiet solidarity steadied her. Evelyn Moore, the retired librarian across the aisle, spoke next. I watched her show her ticket. I've been a teacher all my life, and I know when someone is telling the truth. Let her sit. Diego Ramirez, a businessman tapping on his tablet, looked up and added, "This is profiling, plain and simple." The chorus of voices grew, not loud, but firm. Naomi felt her pulse steady. She wasn't alone. Still, doubt clawed at her. She thought of her father, Darius Carter, who had built an empire from the ground up. He had told her once, during a quiet evening on their balcony overlooking Manhattan, "Power isn't always in the money or the title. Naomi, it's in how you hold yourself when others try to strip your dignity." She tried to imagine what he would say if he were here now. Would he tell her to stand up and demand justice, or would he tell her to remain calm? Let the evidence speak. She didn't know. All she knew was that her body refused to move. Her thoughts spiraled. She remembered nights when she stayed up coding until dawn, the glow of the screen keeping her company while the city slept. She remembered kids she had mentored, their faces lighting up when they solved a problem. She remembered how her mother's hands felt on her shoulders before she passed away, whispering, "You belong everywhere your mind can take you." Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. She couldn't let them see her break. Melissa exhaled sharply, pulling out her radio. "Supervisor to the front cabin. Please, we need assistance." The words hit Naomi like a drumbeat. Supervisor. Assistance. Those were the steps before security. Her palms sweated. She imagined officers boarding, hands on her arms, the humiliation of being marched off the plane. She imagined the headlines, "Teen causes delay in first-class dispute." She imagined strangers online debating her worth, dissecting her appearance, her hoodie, her hair, as though any of it justified treating her like she didn't belong. But then she also imagined something else, a different headline. "Teen refuses to surrender seat. Sparks change." That thought was a lifeline. She adjusted her posture, sliding fully into the narrow edge of 1A's cushion. She placed her hands on her laptop, her shoulders straight. She didn't look at Victoria or Melissa. She just looked forward, out the window at the tarmac where planes crawled like giant silver birds. Her silence filled the cabin. It wasn't the silence of surrender. It was the silence of defiance, of presence, of claiming space without asking permission. Every second she stayed became a statement. Passengers glanced at one another, whispering. A man 2 rows back lifted his phone discreetly, the red light of recording flickering. Naomi knew, even without turning, that her fight was no longer private. She whispered again, firmer this time. "I'm not moving." And though her voice was soft, it rippled through the cabin like thunder. The announcement of a supervisor coming to the cabin shifted the atmosphere instantly. The air, once filled with the routine rustle of boarding, grew taut. It was as if the narrow aisle of first class had become the center of the world. Naomi could feel every eye, even those pretending not to look. James Miller, the cabin supervisor, strode in briskly. He carried himself like a man who believed authority was always on his side. His Navy uniform was crisp, his voice sharp as he addressed Melissa. "What's the issue?" Melissa gestured toward Naomi with a tilt of her chin. "This passenger insists she belongs in 1A, but the seat is already occupied." James's eyes landed on Naomi, lingering a beat too long. He didn't glance at her ticket, didn't ask a single clarifying question. His voice carried an edge of practiced impatience. "Miss, we can't have delays. I'm asking you to step aside while we confirm your seat." Naomi met his gaze, steady. "I already showed my boarding pass. I belong here." Victoria Hale shifted in the seat with a huff, as though the whole ordeal were an inconvenience to her dignity. "This is ridiculous. She's obviously mistaken." Naomi's grip on her laptop tightened. Her pulse beat in her temples, but her voice stayed calm. "I'm not mistaken." From the second row, Henry Brooks leaned forward again. His gravelly voice carried across the cabin. "She showed the pass. I saw it." Evelyn Moore's voice followed, calm but firm. "So did I. She's telling the truth." James ignored them. His focus stayed locked on Naomi. His tone clipped. "Miss, if you don't cooperate, I'll have to call security." The word security rippled through the air. Passengers shifted in their seats, some pulling out phones, others whispering nervously. Naomi felt the word hit her gut like a weight. Images flashed in her mind, news clips she had seen, videos of young people of color being dragged off planes, handcuffed on sidewalks, voices drowned out by authority. Her stomach tightened. But then Henry spoke again. Louder this time. "Hold on. Why is no one asking to see the tickets? That's the simplest solution." Diego Ramirez raised his voice too, irritation coloring his tone. "Exactly. Why threaten her with security before checking facts?" The murmurs swelled. A woman across the aisle muttered, "This feels wrong." Another passenger whispered, "They wouldn't treat me like this." Naomi drew a slow breath. She wanted to speak, to argue, but something inside her whispered, "Don't fight their volume with volume. Let them fight for you." Angela Lee, a young woman a few rows back, quietly lifted her phone and began live streaming. The small red circle on her screen glowed like a beacon. She didn't announce it, didn't wave it around. She just pressed record and angled the phone discreetly, capturing Naomi's stillness, James's sharp tone, Victoria's dismissive posture. Naomi didn't know she was being recorded, but she felt the shift. The cabin was no longer silent. It was bearing witness. James, growing frustrated, raised his voice. "Miss, I will not ask again." Naomi looked up at him. "Then, check the tickets. That's all you need to do." The logic was unshakable, and yet James hesitated. Maybe it was pride, maybe habit, but instead of asking Victoria for her pass, he repeated the same refrain, "You need to comply." The tension reached a breaking point. Henry Brooks stood up, steady despite his age. "No, enough. This young lady has been polite and calm. If you won't check the tickets, then you're the one out of order." Gasps echoed. Passengers turned to watch the veteran standing tall, his hand resting lightly on the seat in front of him. His presence gave weight to the entire moment. Evelyn rose too, clutching her cane. "I've seen enough injustice in my lifetime to recognize it when it's happening. This girl has a right to her seat," Diego added. "I'll testify myself if needed. This is discrimination, plain as day." James's jaw tightened. "Everyone, please remain seated. We need to maintain control." But control had already slipped from his hands. The cabin had transformed into something else, an impromptu courtroom where Naomi's dignity was on trial, and the witnesses were ordinary people refusing to be silent. Naomi's chest swelled with a mix of fear and gratitude. For once, the burden wasn't hers alone to carry. Victoria, flustered, crossed her arms. "This is absurd. Why should I have to prove anything? Look at her. She doesn't belong here." The words landed like a slap, sharp and undeniable. A hush fell. Even Melissa looked momentarily uncomfortable. Naomi felt the sting, but she also felt something else, clarity. It wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about the unspoken lines people drew, the silent gates they locked with assumptions. She closed her laptop softly and set it aside. Her voice was calm, but each word carried weight. "I belong here as much as anyone else, and I'm not leaving." The sentence lingered, heavy and unmovable. Angela's live stream captured it all, the trembling in Naomi's hands that belied her calm voice, the fire in her eyes, the defiance in her stillness. And, though Naomi didn't know it yet, thousands of viewers were already tuning in, commenting, sharing, amplifying her fight. James's radio crackled. A voice asked, "Do you need security assistance?" He hesitated, glancing at the passengers who now stared at him with open challenge. Henry spoke again, his voice steady. "Call security, and you'll have to explain why you ignored every witness here. You'll have to explain why you never asked to see both tickets." The silence that followed was suffocating. James's authority teetered. Naomi folded her hands in her lap, heart pounding but face composed. She thought again of her father's words, "Power is in how you hold yourself when others try to strip your dignity." She was holding herself, and somehow the entire cabin was holding her too. The courtroom in the sky had delivered its first verdict. She wasn't alone. But the trial wasn't over. Not yet. The red glow of Angela Lee's phone camera seemed tiny at first, almost invisible against the overhead lights. But in that small circle of light, the truth was being captured: Naomi's calm defiance, Victoria's disdain, James's threats. Within minutes, that stream would leave the cabin and enter the palms of strangers across the world. Angela whispered to the woman next to her. "It's live." Her voice trembled with quiet urgency. "People need to see this." Naomi didn't know yet, but thousands of viewers were tuning in. Comments scrolled rapidly across Angela's screen. "This is unbelievable." She showed her ticket. "Why are they treating her like this? Stay strong. Girl, we see you. Back in the cabin." Naomi's heart drummed faster. James Miller's radio crackled again. A male voice cut through security team on standby. "Do you require assistance?" James hesitated. He glanced at Melissa, then at Victoria. Both seemed to expect him to push harder, but his eyes swept the cabin and landed on Henry Brooks, still standing, arms crossed with a soldier's unyielding posture. Evelyn's cane rested firmly against the carpet. Diego's gaze was sharp, challenging. James's voice lowered into the radio. "Stand by. I'll advise." The words bought time, but the tension only thickened. Naomi could feel the pressure pressing against her chest, threatening to break her composure. She thought, if they drag me out, the story ends here. If I stay, maybe the story begins. Melissa crouched slightly toward Naomi, voice thin with forced patience. "Miss, listen, you don't want this to get worse. Just take another seat for now. We can sort it later." Naomi looked at her directly. "If I move now, I'll always be the one who doesn't belong. I'm not moving." The firmness in her tone surprised even herself. Victoria scoffed loudly. "She's being dramatic. Just move her. Honestly, this is wasting everyone's time." From the rear of the first-class cabin, a new voice rose. A middle-aged man in a gray suit spoke, his voice tinged with exasperation. "Are you seriously suggesting that the young woman who showed her pass should move for someone who hasn't?" Naomi blinked. More allies, strangers, faces she didn't know, stepping forward with their voices. Angela's live-stream comments mirrored the same outrage. "Don't back down. Naomi, we're watching. They can't hide this. Check the tickets." Why is this even an argument? The cabin had transformed into something Naomi had never imagined. Not just a courtroom, but a stage. Her silence, her stillness, was being broadcast across continents. Her stomach knotted. A part of her wanted to disappear under the weight of all those eyes, but another part felt stronger than ever. Maybe this was bigger than her. James finally snapped. He straightened, voice booming across the cabin. "Enough. Security will handle this." He pressed the radio. "Proceed to gate." Gasps rippled. Naomi's pulse spiked. The word security felt like a blade. She remembered her father's warnings. "They'll test you, Naomi. They'll doubt you, but never hand them your dignity." She whispered to herself again. "Don't move." The aisle cleared as passengers leaned back, holding their breath. The heavy footsteps of security officers echoed from the jet bridge. 2 men in dark uniforms entered, scanning the scene. One, Officer Daniels, gripped the walkie clipped to his vest. The other, Officer Lewis, younger, carried an uncertain look. James pointed sharply. "It's her. She's refusing instructions." Naomi's throat went dry, but before she could speak, Henry's voice rang out. "Hold it right there. Don't lay a hand on her until you've seen both tickets," Evelyn added firmly. "That's right. You can't remove her without checking." Diego stood, his hand raised as if to steady the whole room. "Gentlemen, this is simple. 2 tickets, 1 seat. Let's see them." The officers exchanged glances. Daniels looked at James, who bristled with frustration. Lewis, the younger officer, cleared his throat. "Maybe we should, confirm the boarding passes first." The suggestion hung in the air. Rational, obvious, yet treated like rebellion. Victoria's face flushed. "Why should I have to prove anything? I'm a platinum flyer. I fly this route every month. That girl doesn't belong here." The words slashed again, cruel and casual. Naomi's chest tightened, but she forced herself to stay composed. She folded her hands, her voice soft but audible. "I bought this seat. I belong here." Angela zoomed in with her phone. The comments exploded. "This woman is exposing herself. Privilege at work. Unreal. We're with you. Naomi." The cabin itself buzzed with tension. Some passengers muttered agreement. Others just stared wide-eyed. But no one could pretend this was ordinary anymore. James's patience snapped. "Officer, remove her. Now." Daniels moved forward, but Lewis held him back with a quiet word. "Sir, protocol says we verify documentation before removal." James's jaw tightened. He stepped closer to Naomi, his voice low but venomous. "You're making a mistake. This is going to end badly for you." Naomi lifted her eyes. For a fleeting second, fear and resolve wrestled inside her. But then she thought of her father's voice. "Steady, like stone, power isn't given. It's taken back, one choice at a time." She exhaled and answered simply, "No, the mistake is thinking I'll give up my seat." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried through the cabin like a bell. Lewis, emboldened, finally spoke louder. "We need to see both boarding passes right now." Passengers clapped softly, a ripple of support. Henry nodded. Evelyn tapped her cane. Diego let out a satisfied hum. Victoria froze. Her handbag sat heavy in her lap, the paper pass sticking slightly from the side pocket. For the first time, doubt flickered across her face. Naomi's heart pounded. This was it, the line between humiliation and justice. And though she didn't know it, outside the cabin, Angela's live stream had surged to over 200,000 viewers. Screens across the country were tuned in. People in coffee shops, in offices, on subways they were watching, waiting for the truth to break free. The cabin was a stage, the world an audience, and Naomi Carter sat at the center, silent but unshaken. The officers extended their hands. "Ma'am," Lewis said, eyes on Victoria, "your boarding pass. Please." For the first time since Naomi had boarded. The balance shifted. The cabin was silent, heavy with anticipation. Everyone seemed to lean forward at once as Officer Lewis extended his hand toward Victoria Hale. "Ma'am," he repeated, voice steady but firmer now, "your boarding pass. Please." Victoria's lips parted in protest. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her designer handbag. "This is absurd. I told you, I'm platinum. I've flown this route for years. Why should I have to Henry Brooks cut in, sharp as a blade? Because you're sitting in a seat that doesn't belong to you. Hand it over." The authority in his voice startled even Naomi. It was the command of a man who had led troops, who had stared down injustice before. Evelyn Moore tapped her cane on the carpet, each knock like a gavel. "Show the pass, dear. If it's yours, there's nothing to fear." Passengers murmured agreement. Diego Ramirez folded his arms, his voice cool but firm. "She's stalling. Everyone sees it. Melissa, caught in the middle, shifted uncomfortably. Her eyes flicked to James Miller, but his jaw was locked tight, anger simmering under his uniform. Victoria hesitated too long. The hesitation itself was an answer. Naomi's chest swelled with both dread and hope. She whispered inside her head, "This is it. Either I'm vindicated or I'm humiliated." Lewis took a step closer. "Ma'am, we cannot resolve this without documentation. Please hand me your boarding pass." The camera of Angela Lee's phone captured everything. The live stream comments poured in faster than anyone could read. "Check the ticket already. She's lying. Everyone knows it. Naomi, hold your ground." Finally, with a theatrical sigh, Victoria reached into her handbag. Her manicured fingers produced a crumpled piece of paper. She handed it to Lewis with a glare that could have frozen glass. Lewis unfolded it carefully, his brows furrowed. He read once, then again, then turned the slip of paper for Daniels to see. The cabin landed closer, breaths held. Lewis cleared his throat. "This boarding pass is for seat 14F, economy class." The words detonated in the air like thunder, gasps, sharp intakes of breath, whispers cascading up and down the rows. Evelyn muttered, "I knew it." Henry grunted, "Figures." Diego let out a low whistle. Victoria's face flushed crimson. She sputtered, That can't be right. There must be a mistake." But Lewis shook his head. "It's right here. Row 14. Seat F. Not first class." Naomi's heart pounded so loudly she thought everyone could hear it. Relief surged, but so did a deep, bittersweet ache. Why had it taken this long? Why had she needed the entire cabin, 2 officers, and a live stream audience just to be believed? Angela's live stream comments exploded. Boom! She lied. Justice served in real time. This young queen is stronger than all of them. James Miller's face darkened. His authority, already fragile, shattered in front of dozens of witnesses. He barked at Melissa. "Escort this passenger to her assigned seat." Melissa hesitated, then turned to Victoria with forced professionalism. "Ma'am, please gather your belongings." Victoria's voice rose, sharp and panicked. "You can't do this to me. I'm a frequent flyer. I know people. The protest only fueled the audience's disdain." A man from row 3 muttered loudly, "You also know how to lie." Henry sat back down, satisfaction plain on his weathered face. Evelyn adjusted her scarf and whispered to Naomi, "Hold steady, dear. You did nothing wrong." Diego leaned over, his voice warm. "This is bigger than a seat. You just showed all of us what courage looks like." Naomi's throat tightened. She managed a quiet, "Thank you." Melissa leaned toward Naomi now, her voice softer, apologetic even. "Miss Carter, please make yourself comfortable in 1A." The words should have felt like victory. Instead, Naomi lowered herself into the seat slowly, her body heavy with the weight of the ordeal. Her fingers brushed the leather armrest. It felt less like luxury now and more like evidence of a battle fought and barely won. The live stream count surged past 500,000. Angela's hands trembled as she held the phone steady. She whispered, almost to herself, "The world's watching," and she was right. Across the country, screens lit up. In a coffee shop in Atlanta, a barista paused mid-pour to watch. In an office in Chicago, employees crowded around a monitor. On a subway in Los Angeles, strangers leaned together, eyes fixed on one woman's refusal to be erased. Naomi adjusted her laptop again. Not to work, but to give her shaking hand something to do. She thought of her father. Would he be proud or furious that she had been forced into this circus at all? James Miller barked into his radio. Issue resolved. Resume Borden. But his voice carried no triumph, only defeat. Victoria, red-faced and fuming, stomped down the aisle, her heels clicking angrily. Passengers glared, some whispering, others recording her retreat. She muttered under her breath, "This isn't over," but it was, at least for now. Naomi sat back, her eyes on the window. The tarmac shimmered under the afternoon sun. Planes taxied, luggage carts beeped. Life outside went on. Inside, though something had shifted. She wasn't invisible, not anymore. Angela finally lowered her phone, whispering, "Naomi, you're trending. The whole internet's behind you." Naomi blinked. What Angela turned the screen so Naomi could see the flood of hearts, comments, hashtags forming. Nas, seat, 1A. Justice for Naomi. This is why we fight. Naomi's chest rose and fell. She hadn't asked for this stage. She hadn't wanted it, but maybe she needed it. Maybe others needed it too. The cabin settled, but the energy remained electric, as though everyone knew they had just witnessed something bigger than a seat dispute. They had witnessed a crack in the wall of everyday injustice. Naomi folded her hands, steadying herself. The battle for 1A was over. But something told her the real storm was only beginning. The cabin had quieted, but the storm outside was only beginning. Naomi sat in 1A, her seat at last secure, yet she felt no triumph. Her heart still pounded. Her palms still tingled with nerves. The leather cushion beneath her seemed less like a prize and more like a witness to everything that had just unfolded. Angela Lee kept her phone tilted discreetly, but the screen glowed with numbers climbing higher and higher. Over 1 million viewers now. Hashtags spun themselves into existence. Justice for Naomi. Useet YA, flying while black. Naomi leaned slightly toward her. "It's really live." Angela nodded quickly, her eyes wide. "Half the country's watching. Girl, you're everywhere." Naomi swallowed. The words felt surreal. Just an hour ago, she had been another passenger, a teenager with a laptop and a boarding pass. Now she was a headline in the making. Her mind raced. What if they twist it? What if they make me look angry, disruptive, ungrateful? She had seen it before, stories where truth was distorted, where victims became villains. Henry Brooks leaned across the aisle, his gravelly voice low. "Don't let fear take this from you. You held your ground. That matters." Naomi nodded, but her chest remained tight. At the back of the cabin, a businessman whispered into his phone. "Yeah, it's live. It's blowing up. You have to see this. Somewhere far beyond the fuselage, in offices and living rooms, screens glowed. In New York, a journalist at a small digital outlet typed furiously, pulling the live stream into an article draft. Teen passenger challenges airline discrimination. Live stream hits 1 million. In Atlanta, a civil rights lawyer forwarded the clip to colleagues. In Los Angeles, a group of college students huddled together, muttering, "This is history happening." Meanwhile, in the airline's operations center, alerts pinged across social media dashboards. A young communications manager frowned at the spike in mentions. "Sir," she called out to her director, "we've got a situation. Flight 237 JFK to LAX. Something about a seat dispute going viral." The director leaned over her screen, eyes narrowing. "Get me everything. Right now." Back in the cabin, Naomi pressed her hands together, forcing herself to steady her breathing. She had always been private, careful with what she shared. Her work spoke for her. She didn't need the spotlight. But now the spotlight had found her, harsh and uninvited. She remembered evenings on the balcony with her father, Darius Carter, when he told her, "The world will always try to put you in a box. Don't climb in just to make them comfortable." But being seen was one thing, being broadcast to millions was another. Evelyn Moore leaned closer, her voice a soft balm. "Dear, don't let them turn you into a spectacle. You're not a headline. You're a human being who stood up for her dignity." Naomi's eyes stung. She blinked hard, forcing the tears back. She whispered, "I didn't mean for this to happen." Evelyn smiled gently. "The best changes often begin when we don't mean for them to. You just lived your truth. That's enough." The intercom crackled. The captain's voice came through, calm but strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are completing final boarding checks. We'll be departing shortly." But the words rang hollow. Everyone knew this flight would be remembered for far more than departure times. Angela glanced at Naomi's face, then at her phone. Comments are flooding in. People are calling you brave. Some are saying you're the Rosa Parks of the skies. Naomi's breath caught. The comparison felt heavy. Too heavy. I'm just me. I just wanted my seat. Henry chuckled softly. That's how it starts. Ordinary folks saying, "Enough." That's where history begins. Naomi turned toward the window, watching luggage carts buzz along the tarmac. She felt small, overwhelmed, yet part of something vast, in another part of the country. Darius Carter sat in a quiet office high above Manhattan. His phone buzzed with notifications until he finally looked. His eyes narrowed as he saw his daughter's face on a live stream, saw the crowd of strangers rallying behind her. His hand tightened on the phone. He whispered, "Naomi." Calls were already flooding his assistants. Journalists, activists, board members, everyone wanted a statement. Back in 1A, Naomi shifted in her seat. Melissa approached slowly, her posture stiff. "Miss Carter, I just want to apologize. Things escalated." Naomi studied her, the tightness in her chest simmering into words. "You believed her over me without even checking. Do you know how that feels?" Melissa's mouth opened, then closed. She lowered her eyes. I understand now." But Naomi doubted she truly did. Angela's phone buzzed again. The viewer count crossed 2 million. News networks began rebroadcasting clips. Talk show hosts were tweeting. Civil rights leaders were already calling it a defining moment. Naomi wanted to curl into herself, to hide. But she also felt something stir inside a flicker of strength. If the world was watching, maybe she could show them what resilience looked like. Diego Ramirez leaned in from across the aisle. "Don't underestimate the power of this moment. They tried to erase you, and instead, they amplified you." Naomi met his gaze, her lips pressed tight. She thought of her mother's words. Sometimes, presence itself is protest. She was present, and the world was watching. The plane's door closed with a heavy thud. Engines rumbled faintly, but inside, passengers buzzed with whispers, phones glowing, tweets flying. The flight hadn't even taken off, and yet it was already airborne in another way, carried on waves of social media, soaring across time zones. Naomi sat back, exhaling slowly. She wasn't sure what awaited at 30,000 feet, or, after landing, or in the days ahead, but she knew one thing: her silence had turned into a story, and that story was no longer hers alone. The engines roared to life, trembling under the wings. Naomi felt the rumble pass through her chest as the plane pushed away from the gate. She should have felt relief, a return to normalcy. But nothing felt normal anymore. The cabin buzzed like a hive, passengers whispering, texting, posting. Phones glowed with breaking news alerts. Angela Lee's live stream was still climbing. 3 million viewers now. Hashtags spread like wildfire. Naomi Carter. Seat 1A, grounded in justice. Naomi tried to steady herself. She had wanted only a quiet trip west. Her laptop filled with workshop notes and half-finished code. Now she was a symbol, whether she wanted it or not. Melissa Grant passed through the aisle, her smile taut, trying to stitch order back into a cabin that had witnessed chaos. James Miller lingered near the galley, his face stiff, knowing his missteps were now public record. As the plane lifted into the sky, Naomi pressed her forehead to the window. The skyline shrank beneath clouds. She whispered, "Breathe, just breathe," but peace would not come. A soft chime rang, and the captain's voice came through the intercom. Calm, professional, but laced with unease. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain O'Donnell. We are cruising at 30,000 feet. I want to address what happened earlier in the cabin. We recognize tensions rose, and we appreciate your patience. Please know we take all concerns seriously." The words floated, but they carried no weight. Passengers shifted, unimpressed. Then a man in business attire raised his voice. "Captain, with all due respect, an apology to the young woman is what's needed." Murmurs of agreement rippled. Evelyn Moore tapped her cane once, firm. Henry Brooks grunted, "That's right. Say it plain." The intercom went silent. Naomi felt every eye on her again. Heat crept up her neck. She didn't want to be the center of the flight. She wanted to disappear into her seat. Code running across her laptop screen like a safe river. But Angela leaned over, whispering urgently, "Naomi, they're asking for you. People need to hear you." She turned her phone slightly. The viewer count had crossed 5 million. Naomi shook her head. I'm not a speaker. I just wanted my seat." Diego Ramirez leaned in. "Sometimes the world chooses us. Naomi, this is your moment." Her heart pounded. She thought of her father's words on their balcony. Power isn't always in what you plan. Sometimes it's in how you answer when the world knocks unexpectedly. She rose slowly. Her knees trembled, but her shoulders stayed straight. The cabin hushed as she stepped into the aisle. Melissa's eyes widened, uncertain, but she didn't intervene. Naomi's voice began soft, almost fragile. "I didn't want this. I didn't want an audience. I didn't want millions of strangers watching me fight for something I already paid for." The silence deepened. Naomi's voice grew stronger. "All I wanted was to sit where I belonged. But that was treated as impossible, not because of the ticket, not because of the rules, but because of me, because of what people saw when they looked at me." Her throat tightened, but she pressed on. "Do you know how many times I've heard, 'You don't belong here,' in classrooms, in conferences, in rooms where I was the only one like me, too many to count. And today, I heard it again, in this cabin." A murmur passed through the passengers. Some bowed their heads, some nodded firmly. Naomi steadied herself on the seat back. "I'm 17. I build technology. I mentor kids. I dream about a future where no one is told they don't belong. And yet, here I was, told to move when I had every right to stay. Angela lifted her phone higher, capturing every word. The comments exploded across the stream. She's speaking truth. Preach. Naomi. This girl is the future. Naomi exhaled, the words flowing now. I didn't fight today because I wanted attention. I fought because I knew if I gave up this seat, I'd be giving up every seat I'll ever take. And I can't do that, not for me. Not for anyone who will come after me. Her voice cracked slightly, but it only made it real. Evelyn's eyes glistened. Henry's jaw tightened in pride. Diego nodded with solemn respect. Naomi finished softly, "So I stayed, and I'll keep staying, because we all belong where we've earned to be." The cabin erupted not in noise, but in applause. Gentle at first, then swelling into a thunder that filled the narrow fuselage. Some passengers rose to their feet, clapping. Evelyn tapped her cane against the floor like a drumbeat. Henry saluted from his seat. Naomi sank back into 1A. Her cheeks flushed, tears pressing at her eyes. She had spoken. The words were out. They were no longer hers alone. Angela's phone buzzed wildly. The live stream had crossed 8 million viewers. News anchors were already replaying her speech. Civil rights leaders were retweeting clips. Hashtags turned into headlines. Teen CEO's daughter speaks out at 30,000 feet. Naomi buried her face briefly in her hands. Overwhelmed, she whispered, "Mom, I hope you'd be proud," in Manhattan. Darius Carter stood before a screen in his office, fists clenched, eyes wet. He whispered back to the image of his daughter on the live stream, "I am Naomi, more than you know." But while applause filled the cabin, Naomi's heart was not light. She knew this was only the beginning. The plane cut through the clouds, but the storm waiting on the ground was far larger. Applause still lingered like thunder fading over distant hills. Naomi Carter sat down slowly, her body trembling from adrenaline. Her throat ached from speaking, her hands buzzed with nerves. She clutched the armrest, forcing herself to breathe. Henry Brooks leaned toward her, voice low but firm. "You did good, young lady. Don't ever doubt that." Evelyn Moore dabbed her eyes with a tissue. "You spoke what many of us have carried in silence for years." Naomi nodded, but her heart was heavy. For every cheer, she knew there would be jeers. For every voice of support, another voice would twist her words. Angela Lee tilted her phone toward Naomi, showing the numbers on screen. 10 million viewers. You're everywhere. Naomi's stomach flipped. She whispered, "I didn't ask for this." Angela smiled softly. "That's why it matters. You weren't chasing fame. You were chasing fairness." Still, Naomi's chest tightened. The girl who once coded in quiet libraries, who sketched designs in coffee shops, now had her name burning across headlines. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt exposed, fragile. At the back of the plane, murmurs spread. A businessman whispered, "That speech? It'll be in history books." A college student filmed herself saying, "I was here, seat 23C, when Naomi Carter made history." But not all whispers were kind. A middle-aged man muttered, "Overblown, just a seat." She made a scene. His seatmate shot back, "You saw what happened. She earned it." The fracture lines of perception were already forming. Up front, Melissa Grant approached Naomi cautiously, kneeling slightly at her row. "Miss Carter, I want to thank you for speaking with grace. I realize now how wrong it was to doubt you." Naomi studied her, torn. She wanted to believe the apology. She wanted to let the anger dissolve. But another part of her whispered, "Would you have apologized if no one was watching?" She answered carefully, "Thank you for saying that. But remember, it wasn't just me. It could have been anyone." Melissa lowered her gaze. "I'll remember." The intercom crackled again, but this time it wasn't the captain. A new voice, calm yet weighted with authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your airline's chief operating officer speaking from our headquarters. We want to assure you that we are reviewing the events on this flight immediately. We have grounded further departures of this aircraft model until we understand exactly what happened. We extend our apologies, especially to Miss Carter." Gasps and murmurs swept through the cabin. Passengers exchanged looks. Evelyn whispered, "They never move this fast." Diego Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "They're scrambling. This isn't just a flight now. It's a crisis." Naomi's heart thudded. The word crisis made her chest tighten further. She hadn't wanted to sink a company. She only wanted to sit. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, dozens of texts, messages from friends, from strangers, and one from her father. "Proud of you. Hold steady. I'll meet you in Los Angeles." Tears pricked her eyes. She clutched the phone, whispering, "Thanks, Dad." But then another thought invaded. What if this hurts him? What if his company gets dragged into it? She bit her lip hard, the taste of salt and iron flooding her tongue. Angela leaned closer. "Naomi, news anchors are replaying your words in real time. They're calling it the speech of the skies." Naomi closed her eyes. She didn't want to be a headline. She wanted to be herself. The captain came over the intercom again, his tone uneasy. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to communications from headquarters, we may need to consider a diversion. Please remain seated." Passengers groaned. A diversion. Whispers turned to worry. Evelyn sighed. "See, child, you shook more than this cabin. You shook the whole company." Henry nodded gravely. "And companies don't like being shaken." Naomi pressed her forehead to the window, staring at clouds drifting like torn paper. Inside, her mind churned. She thought of nights she had avoided confrontation, swallowing slights, keeping peace. She had believed silence was survival, but now silence was impossible. Her chest rose and fell with uneven breath. "I didn't want to break anything. I just wanted to be seen." Evelyn's hand touched hers, warm and steady. Sometimes being seen means breaking what refuses to see you. The cabin erupted in chatter as phones dinged with news alerts. Headlines flashed teen billionaire heiress challenges, airline bias. Flight 237 speech sparks national debate. Naomi shrank into her seat. She wasn't an heiress, she wasn't seeking a crown, yet the world was painting her as something larger than life. Angela whispered, "You're trending above the Super Bowl." Naomi groaned softly. "Please, don't tell me that." The weight of millions pressed down on her shoulders. Every smile, every frown, every accusation, all of it converged on a 17-year-old girl who had wanted only a quiet seat by the window. But even under the weight, something inside her sparked, a thread of defiance, a whisper that said, if they're going to look, then let them see the truth. She straightened her back, eyes steady on the horizon. The plane cut through the sky, but in Naomi's heart, the turbulence had only begun. The cabin lights flickered as the captain's voice returned, tighter now, the weight of headquarters pressing through every syllable. Ladies and gentlemen, due to directives from our corporate office, we will be diverting this flight. We will make an unscheduled landing at Chicago O'Hare. Please remain calm and follow crew instructions. A collective gasp swept the cabin. Passengers looked around in disbelief. Evelyn Moore tapped her cane twice, muttering, "Mercy. They're running scared." Henry Brooks shook his head. Never seen an airline fold this quick. That speech hit them harder than any storm. Naomi Carter pressed her hands together in her lap, her pulse thudding in her ears. "It's because of me," she whispered. Angela Lee put her phone down for the first time since boarding. "Naomi, no. It's because of what they did to you. Don't carry all of this alone." But Naomi felt the weight anyway. Every bump of turbulence echoed like judgment. Every glance from passengers, supportive or skeptical, seemed to pierce her. She had spoken truth. But truth had consequences, and now an entire plane full of people was being rerouted. Melissa Grant moved down the aisle, her face pale. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be preparing for descent shortly. Please ensure your seat belts are fastened." Her voice trembled. She knew every word was being live-streamed, dissected, and archived in real time. Naomi turned toward the window, clouds parting to reveal the grid of Chicago below. Lights blinked like scattered embers. Her stomach twisted. She thought of all the reporters, the cameras, the microphones waiting at O'Hare. Her sanctuary of anonymity was gone, stripped away in a single afternoon. The wheels screeched against the runway. The plane jolted, brakes grinding. Passengers clutched armrests. Then silence, save for the whine of engines winding down. "Welcome to Chicago O'Hare," the captain announced, voice clipped. "Please remain seated until further notice." Through the oval windows, Naomi saw them flashing red and blue lights, a convoy of airport police cars, media vans already parked by the gate, reporters jostling behind barriers. The spectacle had arrived. Her chest tightened. She whispered, "I can't do this." Evelyn touched her hand gently. "You already did, child. The rest is just the world catching up." Angela lifted her phone again. "You don't understand. Naomi, they're not just waiting. They're waiting for you." The doors hissed open. Airport security boarded first, faces stern but not hostile. One officer spoke clearly. "We need Miss Carter to step forward." The cabin went still. Every passenger turned toward her. Some offered nods of encouragement, others simply stared, curious or awed. Naomi rose slowly. Her knees wobbled, but her back stayed straight. Each step down the aisle felt like walking into a storm. Evelyn squeezed her hand as she passed. Henry murmured, "Go on, girl. Stand tall." At the threshold, Naomi paused. Beyond the door, floodlights and cameras blazed, microphones thrust forward like spears. Voices shouted questions, dozens of them, all overlapping. How did it feel to be targeted? Are you pressing charges? What do you want to say to the airline? Do you see yourself as a civil rights leader? Naomi's breath caught. She wanted to run, to hide. But she heard her father's voice in memory. "Don't climb into the box they build for you. Stand in the space you've earned." She stepped forward into the glare. The crowd roared, flashes popped, reporters shoved closer, their questions tumbling over one another. Security formed a protective ring, guiding her toward a makeshift podium hastily set up near the gate. Naomi's hands trembled as a microphone was offered. She shook her head. I I didn't plan a speech, but then she saw Angela at the edge of the crowd, still streaming, mouthing the words, "Just be you." Naomi swallowed hard. She leaned toward the mic. Her voice cracked, but she spoke. "I'm not here because I wanted attention. I'm here because someone looked at me and decided I didn't belong where I had every right to be. And when I refused to move, the world saw what happens too often to too many." The crowd hushed. Cameras leaned closer. Naomi's voice steadied. "This isn't just about me. It's about every kid who's ever been told they don't belong in the front row, in the classroom, in the boardroom, in the seat they earned. I'm not a symbol. I'm a person. And all I wanted today was to be treated like one." Reporters scribbled, their pens racing. Viewers online sent hearts and fire emojis across Angela's feed. The hashtag, #HowWeAllBelong, surged to the top of global trends. Naomi ended simply, "I don't know what happened next, but I know this. I'm not moving from the place I've earned again. Not on this plane. Not in this life." The crowd erupted applause, cheers, chants of her name. Cameras zoomed in as tears welled in her eyes. Behind her, Melissa Grant and James Miller lingered in the shadows, their faces pale with regret. Airline executives would have to answer soon, but at that moment, all eyes were on Naomi. As security guided her through the terminal, passengers from her flight began to emerge behind her. Evelyn waved her cane in the air like a banner. Henry walked tall, his voice booming. She spoke for all of us. Naomi felt the weight again, but this time it wasn't crushing. It was lifting, buoying her on a tide she hadn't chosen but now had to ride. In Manhattan. Darius Carter stood before a bank of screens, reporters already calling his office. His voice was quiet but firm. "Get the jet ready. My daughter needs me." And in homes across the nation, viewers sat in silence after the live stream ended, hearts stirred, questions forming, truths uncomfortably clear. Naomi Carter had stepped off a plane and into history. The air inside the airport conference suite was thick, heavy with tension. Naomi Carter sat in a chair that felt far too large, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Across the table, executives shifted uneasily dark suits, polished watches, the scent of cologne barely masking the staleness of panic. The door opened. Darius Carter entered with a quiet authority that filled the room before he even spoke. His frame was lean, his suit understated, but his presence was undeniable. His eyes found Naomi first. For a moment, the father replaced the Titan. He placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and reassuring. "You did well," he murmured. Naomi's throat tightened. She whispered back, "I didn't want this. Dad." He gave a faint smile. "None of us ever want storms, but we can't ignore them when they come." The executives rose awkwardly, some offering stiff handshakes. The chief executive officer, Richard Thompson, cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, Miss Carter, thank you for meeting us under extraordinary circumstances." Darius's gaze was steady. "You diverted a full flight. You created a national spectacle. The least you can do is sit in the discomfort you caused." Naomi sat quietly, watching her father transform from comforting parent to seasoned negotiator. Richard shifted, gesturing toward Melissa Grant and James Miller, who had been ushered into the room as well. Their faces were pale, guilt pressing down like lead. Melissa spoke first, her voice trembling. "Miss Carter, I'm so sorry. I never should have doubted you." Darius raised a hand, silence in her. This isn't about apologies whispered after the fact. It's about the culture that made you believe my daughter's word was worth less than a stranger's assumption. James tried to interject. We were under pressure. Darius's eyes cut to him, sharp as steel. The only pressure you were under was the weight of your own bias. Don't insult us by pretending otherwise. The room went still. Naomi's heart pounded. She had never seen her father so controlled, so sharp. She felt both shielded and exposed under his words. Richard cleared his throat again. Mr. Carter, we understand your frustration. The company is prepared to issue a public apology and consider disciplinary action for those involved. Consider Darius leaned forward, his tone low but firm. You grounded a flight midair, you triggered national outrage, and you want to consider the COO, a woman named Ellen Price, tried to soften the blow. What Mr. Carter means. But Naomi surprised herself. Her voice cut through, steady but quiet. No. What he means is that you treated me like I didn't belong in the very seat I purchased. You tried to erase me. And now you're scrambling because the world refused to let you. The executives turned toward her, startled. She had been quiet since sitting down, a teenager in a room of seasoned leaders, but her words carried more weight than their titles. Richard rubbed his temple. Miss Carter, we recognize that optics are optics. Naomi's chest tightened, anger threading through her voice. This isn't about optics. This is about dignity, mine, and everyone who's ever been told to move when they had every right to stay. The silence stretched. Naomi's hands trembled under the table, but she didn't let it show. Darius leaned back, studying the executives. Here's how this goes. You will issue a full public apology, not a carefully worded PR statement, not a half-step, a full admission of fault. Ellen spoke quickly. We can certainly draft something. Darius cut her off. By morning, and it will include commitments, mandatory anti-bias training across your staff, a third-party system for handling complaints, independent oversight. If you think this will fade in the news cycle, you're mistaken. The internet doesn't forget, and neither do I. Melissa shifted uncomfortably. James swallowed hard. Richard looked as though the weight of the world pressed against his chest. Naomi looked down at her hands, feeling the clash of worlds. She had spoken from her heart on the plane. Now her father was wielding power like a scalpel. Together, they were carving something bigger than either of them had expected. Richard finally nodded, resigned. We'll draft the apology. We'll implement reforms. But, Miss Carter, Mr. Carter, I ask for some understanding. Mistakes happen. Naomi's voice was quiet but sharp. Mistakes don't happen in patterns. They happen in systems, and systems need fixing. The words hung in the air like a verdict. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Darius rose, smoothing his jacket. You'll have our terms in writing within the hour. Miss Carter has endured enough for one day. He extended his hand to Naomi, helping her stand. Together. They walked toward the door, cameras still waited outside, the world still watching. But before they left, Naomi turned back. Her eyes met Melissa's. For a flicker of a second, compassion softened her expression. I hope you learn from this. I hope you never doubt someone again just because of who they are. Melissa's eyes glistened, but she said nothing. Naomi stepped into the hallway beside her father. The noise of reporters surged once more, but her heart felt steadier. She wasn't alone. She wasn't powerless. And though the storm was far from over, She finally believed she could stand in it. By morning, the airline's apology stretched across every news channel, every feed, every phone screen. The CEO himself appeared in a carefully staged video, his voice weighted but polished. "We failed Miss Naomi Carter. We failed our passengers. And we failed the values we claim to uphold. Effective immediately. We are instituting mandatory anti-bias training, third-party complaint review, and new accountability standards. To Miss Carter, and to everyone who has ever been made to feel they did not belong, we apologize without condition." Clips replayed endlessly. Anchors debated the sincerity. Hashtags turned into campaigns. "We all belong" spread beyond aviation, spilling into schools, offices, and homes. Naomi Carter sat cross-legged on the hotel bed, the curtains drawn against a too-bright Chicago morning. Her phone buzzed nonstop texts from classmates, strangers, journalists, even celebrities she'd only ever admired from afar. Praise poured in. So did criticism, brave, entitled, leader, overreacting kid, each word cut, whether sharp or sweet. Naomi dropped the phone onto the comforter, burying her face in her hands. Darius Carter entered quietly, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He set one beside her and sat on the edge of the bed. "You haven't slept?" Naomi shook her head. "How could I? I can't stop thinking. What if I said the wrong thing? What if I made everything worse?" Her father's gaze softened. "Worse than what you spoke truth? You forced them to listen. But I didn't mean to become a symbol," Naomi whispered. "I just wanted my seat." Darius let out a long breath. "Symbols are never volunteers. The world makes them. The question is, what will you do with it now that it's yours?" Naomi hugged her knees tighter. "What if I'm not strong enough?" "You're 17, Darius said gently. "No one expects perfection. But strength isn't about never faltering. It's about standing again after you do." Across the city, protesters gathered outside the airline's headquarters. Some carried signs with Naomi's face. Others chanted her words, "We all belong." Reporters clustered, amplifying every voice. In homes across America, families debated over breakfast. A mother in Ohio told her daughter, "See, don't let anyone tell you where you can't sit." A man in Texas grumbled to his wife, "It's just a seat. People are blowing it up." A group of college students in California live-streamed their own sit-in at a campus lounge, calling it "One Seat for Naomi." Naomi scrolled through the feeds, her stomach knotting tighter with each new headline. Rosa Parks of the skies, teen billionaire heiress redefines civil rights. Naomi Carter, brave or overblown. She muttered, "They don't even know me. I'm not Rosa Parks. I'm not anything like that." Darius placed a hand on hers. "You don't have to be anyone else. You are Naomi Carter. That's enough." But the voices online didn't stop. Every moment of her life, pictures, posts, interviews from old classmates was being dug up, dissected, reinterpreted. She felt naked under the glare. Angela Lee texted her, "They're planning a march next week in your name. Are you coming?" Naomi stared at the message. Her thumb hovered, then retreated. She didn't know how to answer. Later that day, Evelyn Moore called from her own hotel room. "Child, don't let the noise drown your truth. You stood once. You can stand again." Henry Brooks sent a message too, his gravelly tone even audible in text. "Proud of you. Remember, symbols don't carry themselves. We carry you too." Diego Ramirez posted an op-ed online, framing Naomi's stand as a turning point for the airline industry. His words spread across networks, adding to the tidal wave, but Naomi remained curled in her hotel bed, heart pounding with doubt. Was she ready to be what the world demanded? Was she even allowed to be just Naomi anymore? That night, she stood at the window, gazing at Chicago's skyline. Neon signs flickered, traffic lights blinked, life rushed on. She pressed her forehead against the glass. What if they forget me tomorrow? What if they remember me forever? Which is worse? Her reflection stared back, eyes tired but unbroken. Her father entered again, silent this time. He set a folder on the desk, filled with proposals, invitations, requests from leaders and organizations. He didn't pressure her. He simply said, "You choose what comes next." Naomi nodded faintly, though fear still lingered. She whispered, "I never wanted to be a movement." Darius looked at her with quiet pride. "And that's why you became one." The Grand Chamber of Congress was colder than Naomi Carter expected. Marble columns rose like watchful giants, their shadows stretching across the floor. Cameras were mounted at every angle, journalists crowded in the back rows, their pens ready to catch every word. Naomi sat at the witness table, her hands folded too tightly on the wood. Her heart raced, pounding louder than the shuffle of papers and low murmurs filling the room. She glanced at her father, seated behind her. Darius Carter gave a slight nod, his steady presence anchoring her. The chairwoman of the committee, Senator Grace Whitmore, leaned forward. "Miss Carter, thank you for agreeing to appear before us today. Millions have seen what happened to you on Flight 237. We are here to understand not just that incident, but the broader issues it represents." Naomi's throat tightened. She leaned toward the microphone. "Thank you, Senator." Her voice cracked slightly. She cleared it and began again, softer. I never thought I'd be sitting here. I'm only 17. I build apps. I mentor kids. I fly like everyone else, but one flight changed everything." The chamber hushed. Naomi continued, her voice trembling but growing steadier. "On that day, I wasn't seen as a passenger. I wasn't seen as a young woman with a ticket, a destination, a right to sit in the seat I paid for. I was seen as someone who didn't belong, not because of what I carried, not because of what I did, but because of who I am." Gasps rippled faintly through the audience. Naomi's hands shook, but she kept them pressed to the table. "I've been told I don't belong before in classrooms, in competitions, even in grocery stores, but when it happened on that plane, and when I refused to move, the world finally saw it too. And I realized something." She paused, her voice thick with emotion. "If I gave up that seat, I would be giving up every seat I'll ever take, and I couldn't do that. Not for me, not for anyone who comes after me." Senator Whitmore nodded gravely. "What you describe, Miss Carter, is not just an inconvenience. It is systemic bias. What would you want us, as lawmakers, to understand about its impact?" Naomi drew a shaky breath. "It's not just about planes. It's about being told, over and over, that you don't belong in the places you've earned. That does something to you. It makes you smaller. It makes you doubt yourself. And when you finally stand, it feels like the world pushes harder to put you back down. But if we don't stand, nothing changes." The chamber was silent except for the clicking of keyboards from reporters. Senator Whitmore leaned forward. "And what would you like to see change?" Naomi hesitated, then spoke. "I'm not a policymaker. I'm not a lawyer. but I know fairness when I see it and when I don't. Airlines need accountability. People need a way to be heard without fear. And kids like me need to know they belong everywhere their work, their money, their dreams take them. That's all. The room erupted in quiet applause, unusual for a hearing but unstoppable. Naomi blinked, overwhelmed. Behind her, Darius Carter watched with pride, though his jaw tightened. He knew the cost of visibility. He knew the weight Naomi was now carrying. After the applause settled, another senator spoke sharply. "Miss Carter, some critics say you overreacted, that this was an isolated misunderstanding, not evidence of systemic issues." What would you say to that? Naomi's stomach nodded. She thought of the comments online, the critics, the headlines that questioned her. She steadied her breath. I'd say they weren't in my seat. They didn't feel what I felt when a stranger's word was trusted over mine. They didn't see the flight attendant look past me as though I didn't exist. And they didn't hear the cabin go silent when I stood my ground. If it feels isolated to them, it's because they've never had to live it. The senator shifted uncomfortably. Murmurs of agreement rose from the audience. Angela Lee, seated among the reporters, raised her phone discreetly. The live stream climbed again, millions tuning in to Naomi's trembling but powerful words. Evelyn Moore and Henry Brooks, watching from afar, dabbed tears as they saw her stand before the nation. Naomi felt her knees shaking under the table, but her voice remained steady. She wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She was speaking for everyone who had ever been silenced, ignored, erased. When the hearing closed, Senator Whitmore looked directly at Naomi. "You came here as a passenger. You leave here as a witness. Thank you for your courage." Naomi rose, legs unsteady. The applause followed her down the aisle, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. Darius moved beside her, his hand a steady weight on her shoulder. As they stepped into the marble hallway, Naomi whispered, "Dad, I was so scared." Darius gave her a small smile. That's how you know it mattered. For the first time since that flight, Naomi allowed herself to believe it. When Naomi Carter's car turned onto her neighborhood street, she almost didn't recognize it. Banners stretched from porch to porch. "Welcome home, Naomi." Children waved handmade signs, their crayons pressed into bright colors. "Seat 1A belongs to you. We all belong, Naomi, our hero." Neighbors spilled onto sidewalks, clapping, cheering. Some filmed on their phones. Others simply stood with tears in their eyes. A brass band from the local high school played a stumbling but heartfelt march. Naomi pressed her forehead against the cool window glass, her chest tightening. They did all this. Darius Carter, seated beside her, gave a small smile. "People need hope, Naomi, and right now you gave it to them." The car door opened. The roar of cheers washed over her. Naomi stepped out slowly, her knees trembling. The crowd surged, voices chanting her name. A little girl broke free, clutching a notebook. "Miss Carter, can you sign this?" "You're my hero." Naomi's breath caught. She knelt, signed the page with shaking hands, and smiled. But inside, unease rippled. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a girl who wanted her seat." As they walked toward their home, Evelyn Moore waited on the porch, cane in hand. Henry Brooks stood beside her, his broad shoulders straight despite his age. Evelyn's voice carried warmly. "Welcome back, child. Look what you started." Henry chuckled. "Whole neighborhood never looked this alive." Naomi hugged them both, tears pressing against her lashes. Their presence steadied her, grounding her against the tide of attention. That evening, the community center hosted a gathering in her honor. The hall buzzed with energy posters on the walls, food laid out, people hugging, crying, laughing. On stage, Diego Ramirez introduced her. Ladies and gentlemen, Naomi Carter didn't just sit in her seat, she sat for all of us. The applause shook the walls. Naomi stepped to the microphone, her palms sweating. She searched the crowd, Angela Lee streaming from the front row, children holding up signs, neighbors she'd known since kindergarten. Her voice wavered at first. "Thank you. Really, but I don't feel like a hero. I was scared. I cried. I wanted to give up." The room hushed. Naomi drew a breath, pushing past the tremor. But I stayed, and that made all the difference. Not because I'm stronger than anyone else, but because I knew if I moved, they'd never stop asking me to move. And I think all of us know that feeling. Don't we? Murmurs of agreement spread. Heads nodded. Tears flowed. Naomi continued, her voice steadier. "So, if you see me as a hero, see yourself too, because we all belong, and we all have a seat worth fighting for." The hall erupted. Applause thundered. Some chanted her name. Others chanted, "We all belong." But later, when the lights dimmed and the hall emptied, Naomi sat alone backstage, her hands pressed against her eyes. The noise of celebration echoed like a weight. Angela found her there, sitting on the edge of the stage. She crouched down, holding the phone low. "You okay?" Naomi shook her head. "Everyone thinks I'm so strong, but I'm terrified. What if I can't live up to it? What if I'm not who they think I am?" Angela's voice softened. "Naomi, nobody's asking you to be perfect. They just need you to be real. You already gave them that." Naomi stared at the empty chairs, imagining the weight of expectation filling them. She whispered, "What if being real isn't enough?" From the back of the hall, Darius approached quietly. "Naomi," he said, his tone calm but firm. "Symbols don't belong to the person they come from. They belong to the people who see themselves in them. That's what's happening here. They're not asking you to be someone else. They're asking you to remind them they're not alone." Naomi let out a shaky laugh. "That's a lot for one girl." Darius smiled faintly. "That's why you're not carrying it alone." He reached for her hand, steady as stone. Angela set her phone down, not live streaming this moment, just present. Evelyn and Henry lingered near the door, watching, their faces lined with pride and tenderness. Naomi exhaled, the knot in her chest loosening slightly. The noise of the world would not stop. The expectations would not vanish, but she wasn't alone in the storm. She rose from the stage, wiping her eyes. "Okay," she whispered to herself. "If they see me as a hero, I'll show them what an honest hero looks like." The echo of her own words followed her out into the night, where the community still sang her name under the stars. The night was quiet when Naomi Carter finally sat alone on the back porch of her house. The air was cool, the kind that carried the smell of cut grass and distant rain. Crickets chirped softly, a rhythm steady enough to slow her racing thoughts. For the first time in weeks, there were no cameras, no hearings, no speeches, just Naomi, a cup of tea cooling in her hands, and the whisper of the world settling down. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. Dozens of messages waited: journalists, classmates, strangers from across the country, each one calling her brave, fearless, a symbol. She turned the phone face down. Tonight, she needed none of that. Tonight, she needed to be Naomi. From inside, she heard the creak of the floorboards. Darius Carter stepped onto the porch, carrying his own mug. He sat beside her, shoulders touching, the silence between them comfortable. "Can't sleep?" he asked. Naomi shook her head. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that seat, I hear the voices, I feel the whole cabin watching, and then I hear the cheers, the applause, the senators calling me a witness, people calling me a hero. It's like it's all still happening at once. I don't know how to turn it off." Darius stared out at the darkened yard. "Maybe you don't turn it off. Maybe you just learn to carry it differently." Naomi sipped her tea. "But why me? Dad, I didn't plan this. I just wanted to sit where I belonged." Darius's voice was soft but firm. "That's exactly why it had to be you. Because you didn't want the spotlight. Because you weren't chasing anything. You were just sitting for what was yours. That kind of truth. People feel it. They trust it." Naomi let the words sink in. The tightness in her chest eased a little. A faint light flickered across the lawn. Children from the neighborhood had gathered with candles, their parents standing quietly behind them. They weren't chanting or shouting. They simply held the candles high, their faces glowing in the dark. One small voice called out, "We love you." "Naomi." Her throat tightened. Tears filled her eyes, blurring the flames into soft halos. She whispered, "They shouldn't look at me like this. I'm just me." Darius put his arm around her. "And that's enough. That's always been enough." The children began humming softly, a tune familiar from church, a hymn of belonging and hope. The sound wrapped around Naomi like a blanket. The next morning, Naomi stood once more in front of the community center. But this time, it wasn't for cameras or applause. It was for a workshop she insisted on starting. Every seat matters. Kids from middle schools and high schools filled the chairs. Notebooks ready. Naomi spoke to them not as a hero, not as a symbol, but as a mentor. "I'm not here to tell you how to fight your battles," she said gently. "I'm here to remind you that your voice matters. Your place matters. Your seat, whether it's on a bus, in a classroom, in a boardroom, or on a plane, it matters. Don't let anyone take it from you." The kids leaned forward, listening, some nodding, some scribbling notes. Naomi felt lighter as she spoke, as if by giving away the weight she carried, she found balance. Later, Angela Lee caught her outside, camera lowered. "Naomi, the world's gonna keep calling you a symbol. But I think what you're doing here is what will last." Naomi smiled softly. "Symbols fade, but if even one of these kids remembers they belong, that'll mean more than any headline." That evening, Evelyn Moore and Henry Brooks visited. Evelyn clasped Naomi's hands in her weathered ones. "Child, you gave us something none of us thought we'd see again. Hope. Don't ever forget that." Henry chuckled, voice gravelly. "And you reminded this old man that some fights are worth standing up for, no matter how many years you've carried them." Naomi hugged them both, her heart full. As weeks passed, the frenzy quieted. Airlines adopted reforms, Congress drafted new protections, and Naomi's name slowly shifted from the center of breaking news to the footnotes of lasting change. She was no longer the story, she was the spark. One evening, months later, Naomi boarded another flight. This time, she carried only a small backpack. As she walked down the jet bridge, her chest tightened, memories threatening to resurface. At the door, the flight attendant smiled warmly. Welcome aboard. Miss Carter, your seat's right this way." There was no hesitation, no second glance, no questioning. Naomi slid into her seat, and exhaled slowly. Out the window, the sky glowed gold with sunset, a horizon stretching wide with promise. She whispered to herself, "This time, I'm not just sitting for me." The engines roared, the plane lifted, and for the first time since that day, Naomi felt free. Naomi's story reminds us that dignity is not something others grant. It is something we must claim for ourselves. No matter how young or old we are, many of us have faced moments of being overlooked, dismissed, or told subtly that we don't belong. In those moments, it is tempting to stay silent, to avoid conflict and to keep moving. But silence allows injustice to repeat. What Naomi teaches us is the quiet power of staying firm. She did not shout, she did not curse, she simply held her ground. And that act, so simple, yet so brave, changed an entire system. For older generations, this story may echo the struggles of the civil rights era, reminding us that progress is built seat by seat, choice by choice. For younger generations, it shows that courage does not wait for age, it lives in the everyday decisions we make. The lesson is timeless. Stand with dignity. Stand for what is right. And remember, when you refuse to move from your rightful place, you help make the world a place where others can sit in theirs too. Thank you so much for watching and walking through this journey with us. If Naomi's story touched your heart, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Together, we can keep telling stories that inspire change, courage, and hope.